for me, the more I can be what I am, and it's like holding the fear and all those stories of like, that's not what a therapist does, or that's not what, or no one's going to no one's going to come, or you can't do this because of this, that, and the other thing, all my reasons, of which there are many. It's like rehabilitating a landscape.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Emily Swanson, a private practice entrepreneur in San Francisco and San Rafael, California. Listen as we dive into how Emily embraced her niche and her bigger purpose in the world. Emily, welcome to Therapist Clubhouse.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
So I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurial journey, and I'd love to hear about your private practice. So who do you see in your practice?
I really enjoy working with more empathic, more highly sensitive people. And I think for everyone that shows up a little differently. It can show up as anxiety. It can show up as depression. The manifesting symptoms I find are really as varied as, and unique as the person. So I see that. And then in my work, I also work with addicts in recovery from an ecotherapy standpoint, working with connection with nature as a support for recovery.
Well, I think of you and your practice, and we got to know each other through the Superpower program. And I think of you and your practice as a really amazing example of embracing your superpowers and your niche and going after it boldly and really embracing that ecotherapy that you do and being willing to stand out with that. What has that journey been like?
Well, I think for me, what brought me to ecotherapy was really my own personal path of healing. And ecotherapy and encountering traditional earth-based wisdom and spiritual practices really helped me heal some deep trauma, some childhood trauma, and really kind of come back to life, essentially, and find myself with a place on this earth and feel like I was a worthy human being in a very real way. And because of that, and so it lives in me, it's just, it changed my worldview. It changed how I am in the world. And I came into ecotherapy from that angle because it's what healed me.
Wow.
And yeah.
Can you give a little example of what that can look like what the ecotherapy itself can look like for someone who's right in the middle of healing?
Yeah. So for me, I was in a process of working with some really deep childhood stuff that had gotten kind of popped in my adulthood. So part of what happened for me in ecotherapy, I'll give an example of being actually on the land. I was with a therapist on Mount Tam, actually, and working through just a place of deep shame and lack of self-worth and just deep pain and grief. And we were walking, and I encountered these little tiny pill bugs crawling on the moss of one of the trees. And I just spent, I don't even know how long, just watching them, and tears started coming from my eyes because they looked like little cows grazing. And it just started to kind of bring me back to life. And then I encountered this orchid. They're native orchids on Tam, these tiny little ones. And it was like I was seeing myself, like this beauty, this like part that it just kind of called me back. And I can't, it's kind of ineffable. But there was a life that I left the mountain with that I did not come with. And I see that happen in people again and again. And, we are nature. We are mammals. We evolved over millennia to live in intimate contact with this larger body that we are a part of. And I think we feel in our bodies and in our souls the pain of that disconnection. And I think when we can reconnect, especially if human connection is scary, and for a lot of people with trauma, with developmental trauma, with human connection can be really intense. And we often are so defended when we are in contact with another person. And being in contact with nature can really allow ourselves, many for the first time. I know for me, the first time I felt like myself was when I was in nature, and it helped me find myself again. I knew how to be what other people needed me to be, but I didn't know how to be me. And so part of my journey to finding that, and I think it's kind of a lifelong journey, is returning to that well, kind of again and again. And a side benefit, I wouldn't say a side benefit, another real part of my passion and what I do is I want to wake us up. The road we are headed on is not leading anywhere good. The way we are treating the earth, the way we are treating one another. And for me, as I fell back in love with nature and as nature started to heal me, just this natural upwelling of gratitude and wanting to be a better steward and express my gratitude and my care. And so part of what I also want to do is begin to restore that connection so that as nature heals us, then we can then start to heal nature.
So it's all integrated for you.
It's all integrated for me. It is not separate. It is not separate.
I'm thinking too, you're kind of distinguishing between people who are healing from trauma and people who are highly sensitive. And I'm betting there's a ton of overlap in your work.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because right after I answered your question, one thing I realized I didn't say is I work a lot with trauma. And I also have some training in trauma, specifically interpersonal neurobiology, and how our brains and nervous systems respond to other people, to how we heal. And so what I'm loving about that work is it overlays with the ecotherapy so beautifully, because we are natural processes. And so to answer your question, yes, I find that the trauma and the highly sensitive are really overlaid. And I really love working with people with developmental trauma and just significant. I really love working with trauma. One thing I love working about with highly sensitive is I believe it's a gift that is needed in our time. We live in a culture that really prides outgoing, loud, at not listening, who can just speak louder. And so those of us that feel deeply, that listen deeply, that I think helping people learn to reframe these things. I know for me, I was always ashamed of it. And so to learn that actually it's a gift that's needed is such a empowering reframe. But then you need to learn how to take care of yourself and how to hone it. We teach people how to be more outgoing, pull yourself up, but we literally teach skills for soldiering on. We don't in our culture teach people skills for how to use these other gifts. And so I think learning skills of how not only to allow yourself to see them that way, but then how do you use them? And how do you need to hold yourself differently? How do you need a boundary differently? What do you need that might be different?
I'm thinking there's this amazing parallel process with you really helping people embrace this part of them, helping people embrace who they really are rather than just soldiering on and being who other people expect them to be.
Yeah.
And I've watched you go through that process around putting yourself out there as a therapist.
Oh, yeah.
Of you being, rather than kind of fitting in or blending in to what other therapists are doing, I've watched you really embrace, this is my vision, this is my message, and this is how I work best. And just in the last several months, you've been doing that more and more boldly.
I think, yeah, and it's scary.
Mm.
And yet it feels so much more, what's the feeling? It's just such a great feeling to feel yourself come into deeper and deeper integrity with who you are.
Yeah.
And I think for me too, what I love about that is, so much of what I work with clients in is like, how do you find our inner wildness? And it's not that, it's like that. And when we're in wild nature, it just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, how can we allow ourselves to just be what we are?
Mm-hmm.
It's like that African idea of Ubuntu, where I cannot be all that I am unless you are all that you are. And just this way that if you are, I'm sitting here looking out my windows in my backyard and all the trees and the plants they're just absolutely what they are. And that's what's needed for the health of the whole.
Yeah.
And so for me, the more I can be what I am, and it's like holding that fear and all those stories of like, that's not what a therapist does, or that's not what or no one's going to come, or you can't do this because of this, that, and the other thing, all my reasons, of which there are many. It's like rehabilitating a landscape.
Mm.
We've all done this to ourselves. We've all monocultured ourselves, I think, in many ways to try and survive.
Wow.
And
That's
so that
intense.
But it's
yeah.
true.
It's true. Yeah.
And so I think that act of healing is like, how do we let ourselves just be all these different things? And so for me, I think I'm trying to walk my talk a little bit and do it. And it's scary. And you go and, it's a lot of it is walking into that fear.
What's the response been like?
The response has been great. And I think another piece of this is, the piece that I think is so important, and again, there's that beautiful part that comes in with nature, is not in the directions I was anticipating.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like, as we just step in, an acorn turns into an oak tree. That's a crazy thing. That's unbelievable. But there's no like 4-point PowerPoint. There's no plan. It just, this is what happens. And it depends on the soil. It depends on where it is. It depends on how it grows and what happens. And so I think for me, I'm stepping more in. And as I do that energetically, things come towards me, but not from directions that I would have anticipated. Like an example is a friend of mine has asked me to be on the faculty of her nonprofit as an instructor, as a teacher for workshops. So it's not, individual client work, but it's this wonderful thing. And then I've been invited to speak at this plant healer conference in May in Colorado. And again, just I think if I kept my head down and like, this is how many clients I need, and which I did, and that just was making me crazy. And so now what I've just kind of done is I'm orienting myself towards my passion, and things are just coming in, literally, but not the way I thought, not what I anticipated. So a lot of it's letting go of the way I thought it should look, which again, it's that like cultivated, that way of like, this is supposed to look a certain way. And for me, I'm really thinking, actually, I think it's supposed to feel a certain way.
Oh, tell us more about that.
Well, I think it's that difference that we talk about between doing and being.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, I think we all see this when there's a client in our office and here's all the things I need to do to feel like I'm okay. And for me, I think as a clinician, as a therapist, I have had, and I still struggle with this of like, this is what it needs to look like for me to feel okay about myself as a therapist. This is what my practice looks like. But not attending to what's the state of being that I'm holding? What do I feel? How in integrity am I? And I think to me, it just so again reminds me of what we do to the world we live in. We treat our landscapes as they need to look a certain way. And so I think for me, it's like becoming more wild is really beginning to just trust that I am a natural process unfolding, just like that acorn. And I don't need to control it as much as I think I do. I've been socialized to think that I need to control it. And to me, so much it just keeps coming back to trust. And when you're sitting with clients in the room, it's like really just trusting that arc of healing, we cut ourselves and we start to heal. It just doesn't get bigger. It doesn't get like we're not bleeding out. And so just trusting that what we are moving towards, the movement of life, is towards increasing complexity, is towards wholeness, and not away from that. And so I think it's just, for me, it's been a lot of just surrender. I want to be in service to my world, and I don't get to decide what that means.
And what are the services that you're most excited about right now in your practice?
I just get super jazzed about working with trauma, and the work that I'm also doing with folks in recovery. Oh, I have tears thinking about them. It moves me so much. I get to the end of my days working in the recovery center, and I just can't believe I get to do it. Because one, I work in a residential drug and alcohol treatment center, and these people are broken open. They're there because they're broken open. I think in our culture we really scapegoat addicts. And to be with them, and to be with them in a process where they can contact, through being in nature, their own resilience and their own health and their own beauty, and where they can see a lot of what I work with is, nature gives us so many maps for transformation, for growth, for change, and for how to weather what happens. It's like that story of a butterfly that I just love, which is, a caterpillar, same DNA, but a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But when it goes into the cocoon, the chrysalis, it doesn't just grow legs and sprout wings. It goes through a death process. It disintegrates. It turns into that goo. And then there are those little cells that are called imaginal cells that recruit out of this chaos what's needed for this other being, this transcendent being, to come out the other side. And I think for any of us that find ourselves in therapy, but really I think for trauma, for recovery, when we're just in that chaos state, that goo state, when we feel like everything's flying apart, having a story like that, having a frame like that, so we can know, look, here is an example of how this process works. It enables us to trust so that we can be where we are. And it is so helpful in, I think, with the shame, because we all have so much shame when we're not doing well.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, look, this is part of the process. It's a death process. It's ugly. It's scary. It's chaotic. Nothing makes sense. And that's exactly where you should be right now. And by the way, I think it's a great metaphor for where we are in our culture and in our country at this state. We're in that
goo.
We're in the goo. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a couple of nitty-gritty questions about your business. At this point, I know you're working both at the center and in private practice. How many sessions a week do you like to have in your practice right now?
My ideal in my practice is about 15 sessions a
Mm-hmm.
week,
Mm-hmm.
12 to 15.
And what do you charge?
I charge 145 an hour.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about your fee right now?
How do I feel about my fee? I feel good about it. It feels it was a long time in getting there.
Mm.
I have a lot of clients that I've had for many years that have been grandfathered in, and so part of how I feel about it too is I offer something that's very unique. If it works for people, it will really work for them. And if it doesn't work for them, I'm not the therapist for them. And I charge 145 so that I can do some of these other things that are also more part of my service, so that I do have clients at a sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm able to do that because I charge this fee. So it's I think that question of self-worth and all of that, it's one we're always working with.
And I'm coming to think of it more as self-care than self-worth,
Yes.
because self-worth, how can we ever figure that out? Right?
Well, I love that you say that, because I think you're so right. And I had a mentor once said to me, I was like, I don't feel like I'm worthy. And he said, well, how many people that you need to be helping are not going to get the help they need while you wait around to figure out if you feel worthy or not? I was like, okay, got it. But
Yeah.
it's so true.
Mm.
Self-care.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of
Yeah.
those areas, I think, certainly for me and as therapists, it's like we tell our clients, and then when it comes to us, it's like, okay, are you going to take care of yourself in this way?
Yeah. And Emily, if you could time travel to the start of your private practice, what would you tell the Emily of that time?
Don't waste time being what you think other people want you to be.
Mm-hmm.
Don't waste time doing it the way you think you're supposed to do it. Trust yourself. Focus on what brings you alive.
I'm really curious your take on this question, given everything that I know about you and everything that you've said today. How do you balance your business with the rest of your life?
Mm. Yeah, that's a $64,000 question. Um, I'm figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually coming through a period where I started to say no to a bunch. This was a couple months ago, where I realized I'm working all the time. I'm putting my daughter to bed. I'm coming back to the computer. I'm telling people to spend time in nature, and I am not going out
Mm.
because I feel like there's so many things that I need to be doing. I am saying yes to too many meetings, too many things. I just realized I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to do things that I thought I was supposed to do. And so just for me, how I'm managing it now is, self-care, and time in nature for me is work. That's work. That
Mm.
is feeding my work. And so really protecting that. Anything that I'm doing to feed myself is part of my work. It's part of kind of with a capital W.
Oh, I love that, Emily. It's like we're accountable
We're
to
accountable.
doing that. Yeah.
And it's like, in Al-Anon, there's a wonderful phrase, and it's don't let the urgent be more, it's what? Don't let the urgent get in the way of the important. And I
I didn't
think,
even know that was from Al-Anon. That's
it's Al-Anon.
fantastic because it's become like a huge thing in my businesses. So, so perfect.
So isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So it's this way where I had let the urgent was driving my life. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, what I'm really focused on is coming back to what's important. And what that actually means is that my client load right now is not as high as I would like it to be. And I need it to be that way right now because I need to reground and refocus Because one thing I think you asked, self-care and how do I balance, for me, coming back to myself, so that the decisions I'm making for myself, for my business, for my family are coming from a connection, being connected with me and what matters. And when I get when the urgent takes over, it's kind of like in fight or flight. I'm in fight or flight. And so I'm not fully integrated and I'm not making the best decisions. So it's just, it's just finding the ways and how to come back so that I'm fully here. Yeah. So I think that's such a shifting, it's always shifting because our kids are growing and changing, their needs change, our practices change.
Yes.
I just listened to this lecture on sleep that kind of blew my mind. And so I'm adding really good sleep to myself, to how I'm balancing, really privileging sleep.
I am right in the middle of that too, Emily. That's really interesting. Prioritizing getting more deep sleep, and looking at it as a huge priority, rather than just thinking, well, if I, go to bed and then get up 8 hours later, I'm covered, which is good. That's a good start. But really looking at the quality of my sleep, and it's making a difference.
This lecture, I just kind of blew my mind. Well, what you're saying reminds me, there's this life coach. Her name's Martha Beck. Mm-hmm. I can't remember how I encountered her, but I love her. And she has I have these daily things that come from her. And there was one that came and it said, how about we, instead of working for something, how about we rest for it? What would it be like to say, I'm going to rest for my practice today?
Love that.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to rest for my clients or my financial growth, and it reframes everything. Mm-hmm. And so I just love that. It's like, okay, I'm going to rest for this.
Emily, will you join me for a listener question?
I'd love to.
You're the perfect person for this.
Listener question.
So this person says, I do work that some people think of as woo. I'm hesitant to put this work out there on my website because it may be a turnoff for some people. How do you recommend marketing my more alternative services? I'm considering having a separate page on my site and hoping the right people will find it.
Oh, my love. Yes, you are. I am so right there with you. I have work that I think of as woo that I still don't have on my website, that I offer to clients and that I work with clients. And so what I would say to you and to myself, I think getting the eco-psychology piece was one step towards that. Is I'll say to you and to myself what I would have said to what I said to my beginning self, which is, don't waste time. Don't waste time being what you're not. Because I think, part of what I say on my website, and I'm so grateful to whoever asked this question because I need to hear this answer for myself too, is we were all born with a medicine for this earth. We live in a culture that socializes us away from that truth. But that thing that we love, that makes us feel us, that brings us alive, that we want to put on our sites but are worried, that's probably our medicine. That's probably what the world is asking for from us. And the fact that we feel it is because it's being called out of us. And so I would say, do it, write your page, put it up. I'll do it with you.
Ooh, yeah.
In fact, if you want to put this person in touch with me, I'll do it with them and we can hold our breath and say 1, 2, 3 and jump. Because it's really just stepping into who we are. So go for it. Go for it. The more I sink into it, the more I'm happy I did, and the more I wish I had done it earlier.
I love that.
And I think what I've been so surprised by is as I align myself more with what I am, it just comes towards me. Mm-hmm. It's like I've said yes to the universe in this way, and it's like, finally. And then it starts to happen. but it doesn't happen until we say yes.
Absolutely.
So my heart goes out to you. I'm right there with you. I feel it. I know it. It's so scary.
And Emily, what's the best place for therapists to find you and throw compliments at you?
My website is emilyswansonmft.com.
And it's beautiful. It is really beautiful. And I'm glad to hear you saying you're going to put out more of who you are and what you do, but it's already really, when I first saw what you were working on for your website, it was too bland. It wasn't you enough.
Yeah. And
now it's beautiful and it stands out. So I'm excited that it's going to get even bolder.
I am too. I am actually excited. And I think, I'm excited. And I have a mailing list. I send out information and updates and things that inspire me that I love. And then information on groups that I do. I run women's groups, nature focused and journey groups.
So these groups actually go out into nature together?
Well, I have done that. The groups that I do are groups of women where we have, a time for council style sharing in circle. And then I guide a drum journey. So I do guided drum journeys for women to really drop in and access, deeper wisdom. And oftentimes around the equinoxes or the solstices, or we track the movements of the seasons. And we will go out in nature occasionally, but most often they're indoors because you need a good place to lay down and get cozy and do all that. And then we share where we went afterwards. And it's just a really wonderful way for women to connect more deeply to themselves, to other women. And again, it's just that place that I love of facilitating people coming home, just coming home at a deeper level.
And so people can get on that mailing list by going to your website. Is that right? Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emily. This has been a delight.
You're so welcome. It's so fun to talk about this stuff. I just love it. Thank you, Annie.
Today's Snark moment is about bland copy. If you're saying any of these things on your website, try something bolder. Okay, here they are. I work with a wide variety of clients. I have an eclectic approach. The relationship between therapist and client is very important. My treatment is different for every client. My work is influenced by these 10 types of therapy, with a list of all of those 10 types of therapy. I know we all tend to fall back on that kind of bland stuff when we don't know exactly who we're talking to. So we're trying to talk to a lot of people at the same time, and it's not effective. Instead, figure out exactly who you're talking to and communicate something more compelling and unique about your work. Now, I know that's not easy. That's why I spend so much time helping therapists figure out what their message is and who they're talking to. Thanks for listening to Therapist Clubhouse. It's December as this is coming out. Are you taking any time off? Are you taking a vacation? Check out my article, Why You're Handling Your Vacation All Wrong and 8 Ways to Do It Better. It's right in the show notes, so head over to coachingwithannie.com/podcast and look for this episode. See you next week. Yeah, Shel Silverstein has this little poem of he has it as a poem, but it's like there was a person who was blue and they put on a mask so no one would see that they were blue. And then they finally saw another blue person, but neither of them knew because they both had masks on.
Oh, that's a great
I'm like, oh, yeah.